Well, here we are, lighting the candle, a world that works. Every week we get together, we have conversations, no preparation whatsoever. Sometimes it sounds like there's been no preparation, but you
Mhm.
know what? A little spontaneity every now and then is probably a pretty good thing. And that's our story, and we're sticking with it. So I'm wondering right now, we were just talking before going live and recording. Um, are you inspired or do you need to be? I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Life for me occurs quite different inside of being inspired and an alternative of that not being present. Like we've had these other conversations about love, and whether it's here all the time or if you have to be feeling it and it has to be present for you, or is it mostly available when you talk about it? Is inspiration kind of like that too? Like how many days has it been since you last noticed that you were inspired?
I was just because I watch and listen and read and you know so often. I was just inspired like 5 minutes ago because I was listening to a podcast or reading up on a guy that he's a he's done like crossed the Antarctic alone, crossed the ocean in a not a sub but a man powered across the Atlantic or something. I forget what, but I mean, and it just climbed every mountain possible. But now he's doing this thing called a 12-hour walk, and I really haven't read up on it. But since I love to walk, I'm thinking, well, I'll have to find out more. So that's to me inspiring,
Sounds great. It's probably not your average breed of cat, let's put it that way.
right?
So let's go back to the dictionary definition from Oxford Languages. Inspired, of extraordinary quality, as if arising from some external creative impulse, um, of air or another substance that is breathed in. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, to inspire, to inspiration, like inspiration, breath. Yeah.
As a different word from respiration, uh,
Mhm.
and expiration, right? So the context that we normally hear those three, like respiration, typically in my experience has been associated with breathing, um, but not so much inspiration. But you're a health student, so you would know these things.
Yeah, I've also referred to it in yoga.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, for more, because I love words that kind of like, mean two things. So the fact that, you inspire, you get like with your breath, you get expanded because your breath expands you. And if you're inspired like on a, idea level or, with work, you also expand or you feel expanded.
Right.
So, so yeah.
So I love that. Now, is that a conversational thing or something to just know about it? Do you discuss this with your students?
Yeah, I'll talk about something like that with my students sometimes, because the whole idea of the body and your whole being really being sort of like a reflection of everything else. So the fact that, you know, when you do something and you're conscious of it, can you then equate it to that emotional level? So can you use the breath as you inhale and you become expanded to think about expanding ideas or expanding yourself in some other way?
Interesting. So, how cool is it that a word having to do with getting oxygen in and out of your body also has something to do with, well, let's just take a look and see. What does it mean to be inspired? Um, if someone or something inspires you, they give you new ideas and a strong feeling of enthusiasm. And I guess that is kind of like it's a great metaphor, to have a psychological lift from something as an inspiration. And typically, when you breathe, especially if you're mindfully breathing, I think that that's probably a really strong element of true inspiration with
Hmm.
regard. breathing, that you are mindfully breathing. I do breathing exercises and breathing workouts every single day. They usually typically last for 60 seconds. And then I check what my pulse is during that 60 seconds. And that's one of the neat things about having an Apple Watch. It does all these really cool things telling me things about myself. So with that said, going back to the metaphorical inspiration as opposed to the scientific uh, explanation, having to do with something external, possibly giving you a strong feeling of enthusiasm. That's the one that we most likely would land on in terms of having a conversation with somebody from another planet who doesn't know what inspired is.
Yeah, I think it's being either in some way, and I want to say uplifted, but sometimes, being with someone who doesn't think the way you do can be very inspiring to make you create other ideas and other thoughts around that. I mean, I was on two different Zooms today with two different people that share a lot of my same beliefs and backgrounds. I was just off with someone on pets, and we have very much on the same page. So it was very inspiring to actually think that I'm not totally nuts and I'm not the only one in the world who feels like I do. And
Yeah.
then earlier, I was on Zoom with a friend who has a very similar scientific background. So he was an X ray crystallographer for many years. And so we get to sciencely geek out together and got off and felt very inspired because now he does wellness too. So, that can be very inspiring.
Kind of interesting. You would think of inspiring, being inspired to inspire as kind of creating more space in the world, where like creating room for possibility,
Hmm.
as opposed to exploration, which I mean, just that word, it's like, exploration has to do with a magazine subscription, or it has to do with someone passing away.
Or bad food,
Yeah, or
food,
bad foods.
yeah, food expires like it's done.
Yeah, so it's usually not indicating something good's coming, with regard to expiration, unless it's a prison sentence or something like that that is expiring in a couple of weeks. But the interesting part of it is how easily is inspiration and being inspired available to people.
Well, I think these days it's very available. I
Mm.
mean, I think with, like Lisa was mentioning earlier, with podcasts and, books and in some ways the internet and everything like that, and all the information that we have access to, and through Zoom or just COVID, people connecting with people worldwide now. We have the opportunity to get, inspiration from many different things.
As long as you're looking, you know,
Yeah,
there's
Right.
people that aren't inspired to even look. So, but it's out there if you want. So just like anything in life, you know, everything's available to you if you just reach out and grab it, kind of thing. Look
Hmm.
for it. Open yourself to it.
so for instance, if I were to tell our listeners some things about you two fine ladies that I admire, I appreciate, and that I look forward to being with you on a weekly basis for the sole selfish purpose of being inspired. I know I can count on you that this space and the conversation that we're having is going to deliver an inspirational moment, or maybe many inspirational moments every single time we get together and talk. And I recommend, that anyone who is interested in having more room in their life, surround yourself at least with a couple of really great friends who are really interested in the world being a better place. For example, we're now at, I don't even know how many episodes we are in this podcast, but the whole idea was there were, I guess exploration would be a good word. It was like there was like the death of common sense and the death of truthfulness. Don't believe your lying eyes. What you're seeing on your TV set isn't really happening. And then also kind of the death of people treating each other well, as like it's the norm and our culture is it's an expectation that people treat each other well. And it actually seemed 2 years ago when we started this all up, it seemed like people were ditching that, for another way. And from what I could see in conversations with the folks that started this up, was that there was an opportunity to remind people that we are here to build each other up. We are here to stand on each other's shoulders. We are here to create room for all of our lives to coexist and to make this world a better place. So when we talk about lighting the candle, a world that works, it starts first in speaking. It starts first in the creation of our friendship in language. And you stop and think about it. The world was a different place for me, Lisa, 6 or 7 years ago before I met you. And you, Jan, had I not met you, I don't know, now it's like 6 or 7 months ago, it seems, but it seems like forever at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to have such a really interesting impact on each other in such a short period of time. So my recommendation is find two great ladies or gentlemen or whatever it is that you want to have around you, and spend a lot of time getting to know each other and building up a conversation for possibility.
I'm reminded of a quote by Yeats that's think where man's glory most begins and ends, and say my glory was I had such friends.
Yes. Lovely.
And it goes to the old element, like, choose who you surround yourself with.
Yeah, you are who you spend your time with.
Exactly.
So play up a notch. Don't play down a notch.
Right. It's always like I have a friend who always said, I know a limited amount is the thing is I know people who know a lot more than I do, you know, you know.
Yeah, said differently, you really don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And if you're the smartest person in the room everywhere you go, you're going to the wrong rooms. Get a new room.
Get a new room, right? Get a new room.
I think maybe I'll get a t-shirt printed up that says that. Instead of it'll just say get a room, a new one.
I don't know about that one, Bill.
That would be a conversation starter, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Inspiration, I say, creates room. It creates a moment where there's an opening and things are possible. And it may not even be that there's anything in particular that's possible. It's just that it invokes a positive attitude. It invokes a feeling and a sense of having been lifted up, and possibly even invokes a curiosity that might not have been present before the inspiration came. You ever have, these little aha moments, and then you want to write it down and everything and like capture that moment and all the rest of it, and go back and look at it a month later, you go, what the hell was I thinking? I can't make any sense of this.
I do that with things I've written, like little snippets. You take some time to actually think about what you're writing, even if it could be like working on my novel or that kind of thing, or little pieces of poetry. And then like I'll revisit it months, even probably years later, and I go, oh, did I write that? That's amazing.
I
Yeah.
have that sometimes when I speak in yoga classes where I sit there and I say things and I'm like, did that just come out of my mouth? Like really, that sounded really, really, whatever, really cool or whatever. But I was just looking up inspiration, and the other word, it says in Old Middle English, it means divine guidance.
Hmm.
So when I think about being inspired, like it almost feels divine. Like there feels like whatever, whether you call divine guidance the higher part of yourself or like, something, however you want to name it.
Sure.
But it does feel like that. It feels, like there's a reverence to it.
I do that once in a while. I love, well, I love Rumi, but Hafiz I also like too, who was 100 years
Yeah.
after. And so every once in a while I decide to talk to me like divine being or somebody on the other side. So I said, Hafiz, what is love? And all of a sudden these words came back to me. It goes, it is the accounting of a soul. And I went, oh my God, what does that mean? How did I get
Love that.
Almost, it's almost like he's defining that you uh, because you love, it's proof that you have a soul.
that? I know.
I like that. That's beautiful.
I wrote, that was another, like I wrote down and look at it again. I go, because that wouldn't come from me.
Hmm.
I mean, I know it does ultimately, but I would never phrase things that way. So it was definitely something I count as being a divine inspiration.
Right. Well, I find that I also write quite a bit of poetry, and I
Hmm.
find that when I write poetry, where you get to a place where you're writing and it just kind of flows out, and you're like, there's some sort of divine sort of quality that comes through that I think it's almost like your analytical cognitive brain is not participating
Right.
in that part. It's beyond that.
Yeah, it's beyond the thinking stage, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, very
It's
much so.
at a very visceral, low wiring level where it's invoking the autonomic system and subconscious and all that happening at the same time. It's very interesting. So, all right, the really neat part about all the conversations that we have is what's the word? I will say they're not useful. Okay, and that's not a criticism. I'm saying that there's no utility or there's no handle that you can grab onto and do a practice. Um, you can do the practice, but it's the result of the change inside of you from doing the practice that makes all the difference, not the practice itself, if you will. So, if we were to talk about how we could generate inspiration in people, I love hearing people be kind to each other and compliment each other and build each other up and give each other credit. There's very few people in the world that have all the answers. I'm leaving room in case there might be one or two out there that I haven't met yet. He could have come back a second time, any one of the majors. You know what I mean? Can you imagine walking down the street in Omaha, Nebraska, and meeting Muhammad?
Could happen.
Yeah, you just don't know. And so, if you're seeking inspiration in your life, like a way of being, and I don't mean like, phonying up and falsifying, but I mean being truthful and in full integrity and standing your ground in the world as someone who not only believes but is causing great things to happen. How does that make you feel?
I like the idea of kindness and just like you said, compliments. Because if you think about the reverse, that never does anything. Obviously, that doesn't do any good at all if
Right.
you want to measure any of that. And so, to me, when do you feel inspired? It's most of the time when you're at least in it, I don't know. I mean, it seems that you have to feel a specific, like, how do you feel? Let me that's the question. Like, when are you most inspirational? Like, when you feel uplifted or positive, or when you feel negative? And I think both can happen. I think that you can be in a really dark hole, and then all of a sudden you're like, I need to get out of this, kind of thing, and kind of force yourself to, as an impetus to, turn on a podcast that might be inspirational, or listen to some inspirational music, or something, or, something that's going to make you feel, or speak to a friend that can, like that. So I think you can be in a dark hole and still feel inspired.
Yeah. Say
I have
more about that, because I'm suspicious.
You're suspicious. Oh my gosh. Oh no. Maybe I won't say anything. No kidding. No, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that, because I think that we've all gotten to places where or most people, I should be like you, who at some point or another go through something really challenging, or are really stressed about something, and get into a really kind of negative or dark place, and need something that's going to help bring them out. And I think that that's different. I mean, for me, sometimes it's being outside, or watching Tonka, like, all of a sudden, spend time with a baby. I mean, babies are
Oh,
great, anything that's going to kind of take you out of that kind of mood. Or, like we said, like I just said, read something person that you find inspiring in general. Um, listen to music, do something, I don't know, play music, cook, you know,
Lisa, what was your thought, or another thought?
right. No, yeah, obviously I believe everything can be a point of inspiration, but especially with what we've been going through, like with COVID, people have been exposed even within their own being as to things that they were, participating in, and subconsciously doing so. So I mean, that's where I a lot of things have been happening to me where, and then I keep, so it's like a confirmation of things that ways that I feel, and then like big ahas, like, oh, that is how I feel, or that's what I need to be looking at next, kind of thing. Or how do I find people that are thinking this way too? And I keep falling into either fiction or otherwise books that are about World War II, and it's almost like mind boggling. And I'm currently reading diaries of another Dutch woman who was, they didn't find her diaries till 1986, and then they published them. But um, she was in her 20s and became an inspiration and a writer, and but from a rough beginning. But she was a follower of Jung, and just to hear like some of his from way back when, like, and she refused to hate, and it reminds me of Anne Frank. That same thing. Like, I believe all people are basically good, um,
Yes.
and she could see the human in everybody, even though everybody around her could not, and she would argue with people about it. But I thought it very surprising, and so to me, it's kind of inspirational to see where humans are going, and how can I help not be a part of the downgrade of human beings. Because Jung said many years ago, um, regarded he regarded isms as the viruses of our day and responsible for greater disasters than any medieval plague.
You know what? I don't know what year that was written, but that's a classic truth.
I know, and that's what, so it resonates. It inspires me to to find ways to, like, that really feels true to me. That isms are not, there's nothing good about them, and I have to first resolve them within myself too. But to see, it's just like a huge inspiration for me right now.
Unless it's an all-inclusive ism, there are some where it's not defining a small group of people that separates them from everyone else, but it's the nature of many isms and the nature of people who are trained and get paid to propagate and to increase isms. Um, it's been the same in every age, I think. You know,
Hmm.
I don't care how far back you look. Whenever there's been a group of people who codified or codified, depending on what part of New England you're from, uh, if if you whenever something has been written down that is not a self um, evident truth that people must learn and awkwardly practice until it finally is something that they do by rote, but it never seems to work with other people. Those kinds of isms, I think, go back forever, you know? And quite frankly, I couldn't agree more with Uncle Carl. You know, if he were here today, he would basically say, based in the Buddhist philosophy of you are in a death match struggle with yourself that you're continuously trying to define as a object that remains the same through time. It just doesn't. You and I are not the same people that we were when we turned on the recorder. We don't remember what that was like even, you know?
Well, I think that that's, when we look at relationships, I think that that's always really interesting because I think people expect that relationships are going to stay the same.
Yeah.
That thing, and I think that that's evident too because a relationship can't stay the same.
Well, we're finding that out now. I mean, because people are, like I said, being exposed now because what things you didn't even care about before are suddenly blatantly concerning.
Right.
Without,
And
without putting too fine an edge to it, I agree with you 100%. And you don't have to, well, as we used to say on the baseball field, you don't have to spit too far in any direction to hit something, you know, where there's somebody trying to sell you something in terms of how it is. But it just takes, a second to just say, well, that quote again, that word, I do not believe it means what you believe it means.
Inconceivable.
Yes.
yeah.
But see, when you stop and think about um, jargon in any form, which, for instance, let's take just medicine for a minute. There's real importance in being ultra specific in terminology in any type of discipline where there's science involved or where you're looking to stand on a particular definition and move forward. There's no tolerance for all of a sudden a group of people changing all the words to mean something different. Ain't happening, right? We're not all of a sudden going to be telling sick people that you're just a different version of well. I know you don't feel very good right now, but have you stopped to consider how much better off you are than the people who died last night?
Jeez.
I mean, that's got to be really comforting to somebody, right?
But I don't know if I totally agree with that because I think that there are places in medicine where they kind of have defined what it means to be a certain thing. And then I don't think that that's necessarily true. Like, I think there is a preconception of how we're supposed to age or what people believe aging is, for example,
Right.
what comes along with aging. And I don't really necessarily believe that that has to be true.
Well,
But I know
I completely agree with what you're saying, and thank you for throwing a challenge out there. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you had a dictionary of medical terms and someone were going about changing the meaning of those individual words, not using those words and evolving them and transforming them as a result of study and doing the work, I completely agree with you on that. But to make up a an ism that's all about telling people how wrong they are for using the old words in medicine, that they're new words that mean and they mean the opposite of what they used to mean and that sort of thing. I really think that there should be like bells and whistles going off in people's minds going, I don't think so, Tim. Just as you just said right there, having a little bit of critical thinking going on to challenge, what are you talking about, Bill? Because I think it's really important. And what I got out of what you said, Jan, is it's important to discover how people are at different points where we may not have been able to have language to understand it before. Like, how many people are living past 100 these days?
Well, it's not only a question of how are they living, how long, how many people, but how are they living? So what is the quality of that life
Yeah,
over 100? Yes, you could say there are a lot of people living to very advanced ages, but I don't know necessarily that they have a really good quality of life.
right.
And so, and I think there's both. So I think people are living longer, but you know,
I agree. The miracle of modern medicine is there are generally pills that you can take to add, more days to your life, but they're not necessarily going to add more life to your days.
exactly.
And that's important that people remember that keeping someone alive past their feeling of usefulness and being able to enjoy being alive, there's an ethical question there. Why are you doing that? Is it profit? I mean, what's that all about? And how do people get to make choices for themselves? And when do they ever, Jan, actually even start to inquire, how are you doing with what we're doing for therapeutics for you?
Gosh, I think that I don't think we're, I mean, personally, I don't think we're doing very well at that, or most people aren't very good at it because I think that, well, it depends on the generation, but I think you look at my parents' generation, and thankfully I have them both, but I think, doctors are not questioned. So they tell you to do something and you do what they say, kind of thing. I think that's changing to some extent now. I think people are much more apt to sit there and, at least in the circles I travel, where people are just more apt to say, like, well, why am I doing this again? And what does this mean? And, you know, what's this gonna do for me?
Mhm.
And things like that, where, a number of years ago that was just not common. Yeah.
There's another interesting corollary, I think, and that is, my, I, thankfully in the last 10 years I haven't needed to have a lot of doctoring. Okay, but I went through a couple of really bad periods. One time, I actually got infected with a Coxsackie bee virus, which almost killed me. But I was a moose and strong as an ox, and I lived through it. It took a month of being in the hospital, where they clearly had no clue what they were doing. Okay, first it was, we think you're having a heart attack. Well, no, wait a minute, your EKG and EEG are fine, nothing wrong with that. um, your blood pressure is really high right at the moment. On it went, with you have this, now we'll treat you for 3 or 4 days, and I kept getting worse. Then I wound up being in ICU for about 3 weeks. um, and they were waiting for the CDC to send a report back of what the blood tested positive for, if anything. But they really had no idea whatsoever. But they kept giving me stuff. You know, they would ask me Socratic questions, and then they'd give me stuff. Not as a result of doing scientific tests, because they took too long and they cost too much and all that sort of thing, right? So I'm interested. I think you open up a whole domain of inquiry and study and a place to really get inspired. What if we came down to the level of making sure in all of our interactions with people, especially in medicine, that the next thing that we do gives them a shot at a better quality of life than they had when we said hello.
I mean, I love that because my attitude is ask questions. You know, ask questions you know, I think that, one is listen to yourself, which think that's the other thing is that we're kind of programmed that we shouldn't, and that, you know, and the health field isn't really good at, I was talking to somebody the other day and she was saying that she just hasn't felt right. I just don't feel right. She never complains. I said, well, did you call the doctor? And she said, well, no, she'll think I'm crazy. And I'm like, who cares? Let her think she's crazy. You're crazy. You never complain. And there's obviously something that's not right for whatever reason. And so, I think to ask questions and in some circumstances, and I think in many circumstances, don't take no. Like, don't give up. Like, if you don't feel it's right, investigate further.
Yes.
If, if something doesn't make sense to you logically, then listen to that. You
I was
know,
thinking too that like hospice care, it's too bad hospice care can't be applied to people that don't have a dire diagnosis because that's where they're so patient centric, like whatever they can do to make that person's life better. And that to me that and I know there's like that interim field now where there's somebody between the doctor and the patient that's become this new thing to be like your advocate. And I know that's not the word they use, but
Right.
it's a new interim field now. So I don't know if maybe that could be bumped up, but where it's the care is about the each individual patient, which is a long way off. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some movements in medicine, like functional medicine and lifestyle medicine, which are moving toward that direction a little bit more because it's much more about lifestyle and about those ideas versus, just, I don't know, more. I don't want to say it's more traditional because they're still MDs, but as opposed to looking to purely one issue and compartmentalizing a person. I think that's the other thing is that, most areas of medicine, things have become so divided that they don't look at the whole person as a person.
mm,
The cardiologist looks at the heart and the pulmonologist looks at the lungs and the neurologist looks at the nervous system, but nobody meets in the middle, which is really, that old fashioned GP person who basically knew everything about the whole person.
Well, yes, and you're describing the perfect arena to beat the crap out of each other with jargon,
mm-hmm.
each one trying to one up the other one. And when I was in the hospital, I had 11 caregivers with all the different disciplines and everything. And finally, as a result of my not having a successful bowel movement for 18 days, my wife says, we're getting everybody in the room, every last person that has anything to do with my husband's care. And we're going to come up with a plan here, how things are going to go from here on out, because this isn't working, you know? So, I mean, it's a very fundamental thing, for a human being to be able to process food on a routine basis. But if your painkillers are, jamming you up, or if the other things that people are given. So we sat down and we decided we were going to back off on some of the medications and a different tack. And 2 days later, I was at least handled in that particular department. But why would it take 3 weeks almost to get people in the same room at the same time talking to each other while I've got 4 or 5 different doctors prescribing different things, as you said before? Like, this is because of the lung, the fluid buildup in the lungs. This is because of the heart. This is because of the, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they're all looking to see if there's an interaction problem, but they're not looking to see what the whole problem is so that we can make a decision together about the best way forward. I don't know why they don't just do that at the beginning.
I don't either, and I think that it's a common problem. I think because, and I'm not saying that there don't need to be specialties, because I think having a specialty and being an expert in a specific area
Yeah.
is amazing. But when you talk about jargon, having been in the science field, every area has its lingo and its
Yes.
abbreviations and its terms. And I don't know that, that those terms are not necessarily shared by another doctor in another field. And so
Sure.
it's like people trying to communicate that speak different languages. And then, and so the whole idea of having, I read a wonderful book a number of years ago. It was called The Youngest Science. It was by a gentleman named Lewis Thomas. Um, and he was actually, I think he was, I don't know, he was either the director or the president of Memorial Sloan Kettering at some point.
Yeah.
And his father was a physician, but an old time physician in Queens, when he talks about Queens, New York being farms, kind of thing and everything. And he said he was a GP and he used to go on house calls, and how he knew everything about, um, his patients. He knew their whole life basically, because he had gone into their homes. So he knew what their home setting was like and all those kinds of things. And he said, one of the big transitions in medicine was when medicine went from being an art to a science. And then all of a sudden it got to be, divided into two divided. It was kind of like it went from being an art and nuancing and knowing, just stuff which you couldn't describe, but you would meet a person and know, like from speaking to them for more than 9 minutes or 8 minutes,
Yeah.
which is what insurance pays for, which is always mind boggling to me too, is how can they tell anything in that amount of time?
It's kind of nonsense, isn't it? Clearly, the motivation of all the participants is to keep the customer satisfied, who is the insurance company.
A friend of mine said to me the other day, when like she got a denial recently, she called up and she said, well, when did you go to medical school and get a medical degree that you can tell me that I can or cannot have this test?
Right.
No, it's dollars and cents. And so that's another whole thing. But here's the opportunity. I started asking questions and making bold statements as a result of something you said, Jan, which I think is phenomenal. And I think it's something that people should take our whole conversation here and consider that if you're in a dark place, you can't be dark and inspired at the same time. You can only have, I mean, Einstein will tell you this. In the universe, in a particular space, at a particular time, there can only be one thing there. You can't have multiple things in the same space. So the choice to transform being in darkness or being down or having no lit candle, go and find somebody to get your candle lit, So I loved what you said with that, the whole notion of being inspired when you're in a dark place. I mean, nobody needs it more than that time. That's when that would be the right prescription for just about everybody on the planet. So how about transformation? Because that's what that is. You're taking a situation or something and you're changing its form beyond essence. And if you're doing that transformation, that has to be a birthright. It has to be a birthright of transformation, that you will always have the opportunity to be in a situation where you feel unloved, and then you can transform that immediately into being loved and having the experience of being loved, or being some state that's unacceptable to you, and making a choice to not make it better, but to replace it with something of your own choosing. That transformation in a moment is something that if people were to take it on, like, I'm a little transformation machine, I'm going out, I'm going to be creating, I'm going to be stimulating, and I'm going to be generating inspirational space all around me, or the folks that I'm with are going to remind me to, that's where your friends, ask the audience or phone a friend is really important. You have to have somebody who's taking turns with you, because it's normal for human beings to go up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not authentic to always be Pollyannish. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I'm suggesting is that if you do the work up front to construct yourself, a culture of being surrounded by great people, you won't tolerate each other not being the best they can possibly be for very long, right?
Right.
And the interesting part of that is the conversation that goes like, how are you doing? Oh, how can I help? Right? Aren't those the two sentences? And then they go, oh no, it's something I got to work through on my own, or whatever it is. Okay. All right. So what's your plan? Explain to me what you're doing, about this thing that seems to sound like a complaint, and it's a state that you don't particularly sound like you're having any fun. But maybe you do want to have this state for a little while and just kind of like, splash around in that for a minute or two. That could be a good thing too, right? As long as you're choosing to. But most people find themselves in a situation of darkness and don't have a clue how to replace that with being in the light.
I think it's harder today too because of the lack of even phone conversations or person-to-person conversations, because everybody's so
Yeah.
reliant on technology. Because I know the easiest way for me to get out of something like that is to call the friend that I know that will help me do that. But not everybody will do that, and like in that moment, I cannot read something and get inspired.
Mm-hmm.
It won't help me. I need
Right.
I need a human being to hear me and respond. So, and I think that's what's been going on with the COVID situation too, and why everybody's having such difficulty, because people aren't talking to each other. They're texting and technologing each other, but not reaching out as much.
Yeah. I mean, the written word, where you've got a paragraph, we were talking about that, the whole nonverbals. It's like, I can't see the rest of your body. You can't see the rest of my body. I mean, there are times sitting at a meeting where I'm the chairman of the thing. I'm watching, to make sure everybody's engaged, and if there's any, because there are people who will communicate volumes and never open their mouth. I always call on them. They're the ones who usually help us get off the schneid in terms of, what people are thinking, but nobody has said out loud yet. So the whole idea of a set of circumstances messing with our training to become closer to each other. And man, I thought we were headed in the right direction. The 90s were great, and we were talking about honoring people's whatever individuals wanted and how they wanted to behave, and as long as it did no harm, I mean, who really gives a good rap, right? So along with that, families got further apart, businesses got further apart. I mean, in many cases, couples got further apart, you know? So now what?
Good point.
So here we are. And if you had a choice as to how to be, why wouldn't you choose being inspired? That could be a perfectly valid experiment for a while.
Mhm.
You're not going to remember to be inspired all the time. I mean, people put, I don't know if you two ladies do this, but there are people that I know that put sticky notes all around the house. Chin up, breathe. You are good enough.
I
All
used
of
to
these.
I used to do that. I used to
Yeah.
put in post-it notes on the inside of cabinets or in the visor of my car. Was a big one, so that when I put down the visor, I would see a post-it note that said something.
Yeah.
I have friends who do it on mirrors, like things like that. I had a gratitude wall during COVID. Basically, it was a post-it note with something I was grateful for when I
Yeah.
started and thought COVID was going to not last that long. And then it ended up being a whole wall in my kitchen of yellow post-it notes, just trying to keep myself, it was different than having a gratitude journal. It was a wall that I saw right in front of me, multiple, like zillions of times a day.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't know. There have been times in history where they decided that the right thing to do was to let a pandemic just run its course as quickly as possible, as opposed to trying to flatten the curve. And once again, that wasn't to keep more people alive. That was to keep the hospitals from being, overrun. That theme song, I like it.
Music is inspiration.
Yes. So I'm being summoned by a higher power. Is there, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, no doubt about it, but I'm just wondering, we got two ways we can go. We can wrap up here. We're getting close to an hour.
Mhm.
Or I can bow out and go take care of my emergency. And you ladies can continue to talk for another 10 minutes or so. And then I don't know how to end it without giving one of you. Well, I'll tell you what. How about final thoughts? And then we'll wish everybody well. And we'll dare our listeners to practice transformational behavior for the next week. What do you think?
Based on what we just said, I mean, because the other thing about when you feel down is to call somebody, is like beat somebody to the punch and just call any one of your friends, make that call, person to person call, and see how they're doing now. Because there's nothing like somebody asking how you are legitimately that can throw a person into into revealing something that they needed to get off their chest, kind of thing.
And I think that if you don't have, I think if you don't have someone you feel you can call, think of your favorite thing that you like to do. Whether it be outside in nature, listen to music, dance, play with pets, spend time around babies. I mean, whatever it is, and just see if you can do it for a few minutes and see if it creates a shift. Like it doesn't, like, you don't have to get up and dance for an hour, like get up and dance. What did you say, Lisa?
You could.
Good. I'm not telling you not to.
All right.
But you don't have to. You can just get up and move for a few minutes and just see whether anything shifts.
And the other thing too is, we've talked about this before, your power pose is so important. We'll do power poses again next week, but you can stand there for 2 full minutes with your arms up in the air. I am the queen of the world. I am the king of the world. I am, I don't know what I am, but just being in a powerful position, or your fists on your hips, prepared to go out and put your cape on and fly to that rooftop. Awesome conversation. And I want to thank both of you. I am humbled by both of your experience, understanding, study, and I'm really pleased to have you as my friends.
Right back at you.
Yes.
So everyone at home, you could get a podcast going. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and hopefully our world's working a little better now, and so is yours. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.